All right, so I'm gonna do it the old school way, I guess, and I may not pick it up too well, but we'll go to 1 Peter 3. 1 Peter 3. I want to finish teaching on the Hell-O-Ween series. So we've had 4 lessons so far. This will be the 5th. And I'd like to have it all recorded online. 1 Peter chapter 3. Look at verse 4. 1 Peter 3, 4. It says, we can back up to verse 3. It says, whose adorning, let it not be the outward adorning of plaiting the hair and of wearing of gold or of putting on of apparel, but let it be the hidden man of the heart, and that which is not corruptible, even the ornament of a meek and quiet spirit, which is in the sight of God of great price. All right, this is talking about modesty or the apparel of an individual, a Christian, a woman, in the body of Christ. And of course, what we see here, he says that not to let the outward adorning be of the plaiting of the hair, the wearing gold, putting on of apparel, but let the ornaments be of a meek and quiet spirit. And Hell-O-Ween is anything but a meek and quiet spirit. And Hell-O-Ween is all about putting on a costume, right? Hell-O-Ween's all about putting on a costume. And so here, he's telling you not to put on a costume when you go to church. Now, it's not to say you don't get dressed and look your best and, you know, ladies can't wear makeup, but that's not what it's saying. It's just saying you don't put on a costume to go to church. You reflect outwardly what should be on the inside. If you're miserable on the inside, but you're dressing like everything's wonderful and, you know, you're just this happy-go-lucky Christian and everything's right in your life, then you're being a hypocrite. And it's a costume. And that's all Hell-O-Ween is. It's a bunch of hypocrites, a bunch of costume wearers who don't have a meek and quiet spirit. Hell-O-Ween is anything but a time of a meek and quiet spirit. In fact, it's all about unclean spirits, isn't it? Hell-O-Ween's all about unclean spirits. So I thought I'd start here this morning as a way of introduction, that the Christian is supposed to have a meek and quiet spirit and is supposed to be modest in their apparel. And of course, Hell-O-Ween is anything but. All right, so this week I want to talk about the ornaments of Hell-O-Ween, the ornaments of Hell-O-Ween. All right, the ornaments of a Christian are meekness and quietness, but the ornaments of Hell-O-Ween are anything but meek and quiet. Hell-O-Ween has always been a holiday. Of course, that's what the world calls it, a holiday, but filled with mystery, magic, and superstition. It began as a Celtic end-of-summer festival during which people felt especially close to the deceased relatives and friends. For these so-called friendly spirits, they set places at the dinner table, left treats on doorsteps and along the side of the road, and lit candles to help loved ones find their way back to the spirit world. The Druid, or the Druids, as we've covered, the satanic priests, are without question connected to the occult, witchcraft, Satanism, paganism, and virtually all facets of the occult, and that required and gave instruction on how to conduct themselves for this spiritual festivity called Samhain. Okay, they also taught what we get in the world today as Hell-O-Ween and all the ornaments that go along with it. It started with, you know, the jack-o'-lantern, the trick-or-treats, all that stuff comes from Druid practices. All right, so the jack-o'-lantern, the trick-or-treating, costumes, pranks, ghosts, demons, goblins, witches, all of it goes back to the time of the Druids and the Celts 2,000 years ago at the festival of Samhain. Hell-O-Ween superstitions rely on the goodwill of the very same spirits whose presence the early Celts felt so keenly at the hands of the Druids. I'll read you some quotes and then we'll get to some of these ornaments. First quote comes from George William Douglas. His book is called The American Book of Days, page 566. The mystic rites and ceremonies with which Hell-O-Ween was originally observed had their origin among the Druids. All right, this is from David Skull, who wrote a book entitled Death Makes a Holiday, The Cultural History of Halloween, page 20. All histories of Halloween inevitably wind back to the ancient Celtic festival of Samhain. This is from Encyclopedia Britannica 2005, entitled Halloween. Halloween had its origins in the festival of Samhain among the Celts of ancient Britain and Ireland. And lastly, Sue Ellen Thompson, in her book Holiday Symbols and Customs, page 251, Halloween can be traced back directly to Samhain, the ancient Celtic festival honoring the Lord of the Dead. So there's just 4 more quotes there that all of these different authors and writers come to the same conclusion that Halloween goes directly back to the festival of Samhain, the feast of the Lord of the Dead, the Druids, the Celts, Ireland, and all that kind of stuff. All right, here's some of the things that you can find within Halloween. Now, maybe not all of it is familiar to you, but at some point in time, all of these things were found within Halloween. All Souls Day cakes, All Souls Day cakes. Poor citizens would beg for food and families, not families. Poor citizens would beg for food from families, and those families would give them pastries called soul cakes in return for their promise to pray for the family's dead relatives. This practice was referred to as going a-souling or soul caking. Okay, so that's Souls Day cakes. Costumes. The tradition of dressing in costume for Halloween has both European and Celtic origin, where they thought that they would encounter ghosts if they left their homes. To avoid being recognized by these ghosts, Celts would wear scary masks or costumes, mostly made up of dead animal fur or skin. Bonfires. Bonfires come from the compound word bone fire. The Celts believed that the gods controlled the sun, and the shortening days were a sign of their awesome power. So they built bonfires to honor these gods and to pray for the return of the sun. To thank the earth for giving up her bounty at harvest time, the Celts offered the gods blood sacrifices. Cows, horses, and other animals, along with human sacrifices, were thrown onto huge bonfires, and their bones, being all that was left, originated the term bonfire or bone fire. And of course, if you have a bonfire, and I love a good bonfire, who doesn't? It doesn't mean you're practicing. All I'm saying is that this was something that originated with the Celts, the Druids, and it came from the compound word bone fire. Bowls of candy. On Halloween, to keep ghosts away from their houses, people would place bowls of food or treats outside their homes to appease the ghosts and prevent them from attempting to enter. Jack-o'-lanterns. Jack-o'-lanterns, or the term jack-o'-lantern, was used for the same purpose as the bowls of candy, although a turnip was originally used. The jack-o'-lantern comes from an Irish tale that involves an Irishman named Stingy Jack, who was barred from heaven for his inhospitality and locked out of hell for his practical jokes on the devil. Until Judgment Day, his soul and spirit is condemned to walk the earth with a burning coal in a lantern to light his way. This was known as Jack of the Lantern. If you actually go back and read, I just gave you a brief synopsis, but read about how Stingy Jack, the tale anyway, Stingy Jack, how he tricked the devil. It's kind of an interesting thing. All right, orange and black. How come orange and black are the colors of Halloween? Even the orange and black colors of Halloween have a wicked origin. At the Druid Festival of Death for Samhain, huge bonfires or bonfires were used for offering human and animal sacrifices. So the colors of the night were orange flames glowing in the black night. So there's your black and orange. Trick or treat. Its origin in the customs of peasants going house to house begging for money to purchase necessities for the feast of Muck Allah, the Druid sun god. A blessing was promised to generous givers, while threats were often made to those who were stingy. In the 17th century, the Irish peasants went about begging for money and goodies for a feast and demanding in the name of Columbkill, who was the 5th century founder of a monastery in Iona. Think of Columbus without the us, and then his last name Kill, Columbkill. 5th century founder of monastery. He would call for fatted calves and black sheep to be prepared, or else they would face a certain death. All right, candles in the window. These were, in place of Druid fires, candles representing the spirit of a departed one were collected and lighted on Halloween in prayers for the souls of the givers said before them. And I've seen that recently. There's a house we're driving by. You'll see it around Christmas time too. People put candles in the window.
Yeah.
But Halloween, they put those orange candles, and that's supposed to represent spirits and praying for the souls of the dead. Bobbing for apples. Now this one's real interesting, I thought. Bobbing for apples. Again, if you do this, it's not necessarily that you're practicing in the way that they intended to practice. However, where does this idea come from?
Right.
Number one. Number two, how come does it happen around Halloween time in the fall harvest? You don't bob for apples in the springtime because obviously there's no apples to be bobbed. But where does this idea come from? Well, it comes because apples are a fall thing, and we'll read it here. By 43 AD, the Roman Empire had conquered the majority of Celtic territory. In the course of the 400 years that they ruled the Celtic lands, two festivals of Roman origin were combined with the traditional Celtic celebration of Samhain. The first was Feralia, so we're mixing Romanism and paganism. Rome and the Celts, the Irish here, together. The first was called Feralia, a day in late October when the Romans traditionally commemorated the passing of the dead. So like All Souls Day. The second was a day to honor Pomona, the Roman goddess of fruit and trees. The symbol of Pomona is the apple, and the incorporation of this celebration into Samhain probably explains the tradition of bobbing for apples that is practiced today on Halloween. In honor of Samhain, subjects were forced to bob for apples in boiling hot water. Those who lived through the ordeal were set free. Now the way this thing worked was like this. They would take an effigy, they take a big old giant wicker basket, the Wicker Man, and the giant basket, we're talking about sometimes 50, 100 feet tall, and they'd stuff people in it. The people would go in there. So picture like a cage, if you will, made in the likeness of a person. And they would put the souls, the bodies of human sacrifices into this cage, or into this wicker basket, this Wicker Man. And it could be criminals. It could be those who didn't offer enough money. It could be those who weren't being nice to the Druids, and so they were taken captive, or parents would offer up their children on behalf of the home, or someone in the home on behalf of the home. And when they got to be too full, stuffed too full, what they would do is they would allow some to come out, and they would take them, and they would tell them, you can be set free, but you got to bob for apples. You got 3 chances to bob for these apples out of this boiling water. And if they didn't go for it, they'd stuff them back in the cage until they found somebody who would come out so they could get what they needed in there without too much spillover. And then they'd also be able to watch some people torture and die to death by putting their head into a boiling pot of water while bobbing for apples. Cruel stuff, man. That's the idea for the bobbing for apples. Now, if you survived it, you were set free, but what did your face look like afterwards? Probably not pretty. Now, black cats, this is the last one for ornaments. Again, we're talking about ornaments of meek and quiet spirit. None of this stuff matches the ornaments of a meek and quiet spirit. None of what you'd see out there in the world by way of, the ornament, wearing of apparel, the gold, and all that kind of stuff. That's all show, and that's what Halloween is, all show. Well, part of all that show originates with all this type of showing here, and it's not pretty. All right, black cats. How come black cats are such hated creatures in the world, you know? Well, how did black cats become the thing you don't want to have cross your path? The idea has its roots in the Middle Ages. The black cat was believed by the Druids to be evil spirit, friends of witches, even witches themselves who had turned themselves into a black cat. These black cats were often kept in wicker cages and burned in animal sacrifices. So for the same reason, the same thing they would do with humans, stuff them in that Wicker Man, they would do with black cats. So that's the ornament of a meek and quiet spirit. Now to piggyback that, look at Isaiah 28 and Isaiah 1. Isaiah 28 and Isaiah 1. That's a very short. A lot of people have, there's a lot of activities around Halloween. I just kind of want to give you an idea as to where some of that stuff comes from. Brother Dave, quickly, sir.
Yeah, and I was going to say, in the turn of the century, the kids used to take pieces of furniture out of their house, put it in the middle of the street, and have bonfires at Hell-O-Ween.
There you go.
And also, you made me think of the cakes, how they bake cakes to the Queen of Heaven.
Right, that's right. All right, Isaiah chapter 1 and Isaiah 28. Now look at Isaiah 28. That was called the Ornaments of Hell-O-Ween. This last one, because I didn't have enough time to try to make a fifth week or sixth week. I'll include it into this one. I call it the open border policy for Halloween. The open border policy for Halloween. Kind of political in a way. It's intended to be. All right, and so look at Isaiah 28, verse 15. Because ye have said, we have made a covenant with death, and with hell are we at agreement. When the overflowing scourge shall pass through, it shall not come unto us. For we have made lies our refuge, and under falsehood have we hid ourselves. That's a great verse to show how one can deceive themselves. They make a covenant with death and hell, and they say nothing's going to harm us, we're not going to face any repercussions for this. They've deceived themselves. And that's what Halloween is. It's a time for people to make a covenant, an agreement with death and hell by participating in things that are clearly connected to death and hell. You can't miss it. If you've been here any length of time on this subject, you can't miss it. And yet Christians have made an agreement with death and hell. And America has made an agreement with death and hell by allowing Halloween to be one of the most highly sought after, celebrated, decorated holidays, right along with Christmas. And I think God has punished America, and God has punished Christians as a result. All right? Isaiah 28:15. Now go look at Isaiah chapter 1. Again, we're calling this the open border policy. So when you allow this stuff to come in, you're opening the borders. You're opening the borders for these things that come into America. Isaiah chapter 1, verse 4. Ah, sinful nation, a people laden with iniquity, a seed of evildoers, children that are corrupters. They have forsaken the Lord. They have provoked the Holy One of Israel unto anger. They are gone away backward. Look at verse 7. Your country is desolate. Your cities are burnt with fire. Your land, strangers devour it in your presence, and it is desolate as overthrown by strangers. That's open border policy right there. When you don't put a wall up, when you don't put guards at your nation's borders, you allow strangers to come in. They don't just come in with the clothes they have on their back. They come in with the gods in their heart. And all their traditions and all of their idolatry. And that's how we got here, right? It's how the Druids got there, is that, again, it was passed, they went from the Canaanite Phoenicians, and they migrated, and they ended up over that way. And then it made its way into America. And America has embraced it. And she's, bring me all your huddled masses and all that nonsense there. And, all that stuff about, we got to be, welcoming. We got to allow all these people to come into our country. We got to be, showing that we're a compassionate nation. Well, you can have compassion for a nation, but you can have laws and rules. Right. Otherwise, your land's going to be desolate. It's going to be devoured in your presence, and strangers are going to overthrow it. And that's exactly where we are today. And if you don't recognize that that's exactly a fulfillment of this verse here for America, you're deceiving yourself. All right. So, but it didn't just start with the Mexican border there, Texas and Mexico border, or California-Mexico border. It didn't just start there, the Arizona-Mexico. It doesn't just start there. It started back in Israel's day, and it's happened. It's always happened this way. That when you allow strangers to come into what's not theirs, they inevitably destroy it because they have no love for it. It's not theirs. No criminal that breaks into your home really cares about how he leaves it. Yeah, right. And no criminal breaks in your home and then cleans up after himself. It's not his. He doesn't care nothing about it. He'll smash everything in his sight and take what's not his, and he doesn't care about it. And the devil certainly does not care what happens to America. That's right. And he doesn't care what happens to Christian homes. He doesn't care what happens to Christian churches. If he cares at all, it's to see them destroyed. Right. And that's exactly what's happened to America. He's destroyed it, and he's destroyed it from the within. By allowing all this stuff to come in, that Americans over time embrace it. They don't kick it out. They allow it, they tolerate it, then they begin to embrace it, and they celebrate it, and then they become desolate as a result. So I want to talk about the open border policy for Halloween. The celebration of Halloween was extremely limited in colonial New England because of the rigid Protestant and Puritan belief system at that time. The Pilgrims and our founding fathers of America refused to permit the holiday to be observed because they knew of its satanic origin and that it would be a day condemned by the scriptures. Now, the reason why they knew is because they came over from England and Great Britain, and that's where this stuff was. Remember, it was in Great Britain, Ireland, and France, and it was in that region. It's all European stuff that made its way over into America. So our forefathers, not only were they escaping Roman Catholicism, they were escaping paganism and all the stuff that was going on over there. And look at America today. Oh, look at England today, man. She's a mess. All right. It was a day to be condemned by Scripture. They used Scripture to condemn it. As the beliefs and customs of different European ethnic groups and the spiritual nature of American Indians meshed, a distinctly American version of Halloween began to emerge throughout the late 17th and 18th century. The first celebrations included play parties, which were public events held to celebrate the harvest. By the middle of the 19th century, annual autumn festivities were common. But it seems that its vibrancy began in the 1840s when there was a potato famine in Ireland, which sent thousands of Irish Roman Catholic immigrants to America. So just, famine will do that. You read the Bible, I think it was something like 13 or 14 famines in the Bible, something like that. And that's how Jacob got. Jacob and the 12 tribes got into Egypt. Was God brought a famine in, and it drove them from there to go into Egypt. And that's how God does things. He'll use a famine to accomplish His purpose and His will. All right, so you have all these Irish Roman Catholic immigrants coming to America. Unfortunately, they brought Halloween with them. America was flooded with these new immigrants, which led to the popularization and celebration of Halloween, especially here in New England, right? A lot of those Irish settlers here in New England, especially in New York. This was a satanic attempt to infiltrate America, not only with the false teachings of Rome, but also to influence Americans with the pagan rituals of the Druids in violation of Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 2, which in part reads, "Learn not the way of the heathen." Borrowing from European traditions, Americans began to dress up in costumes and go house to house asking for food or money, a practice that eventually became known as trick-or-treating. We saw that in the Ornaments already. Young women believed that on Halloween, they could divine the name or appearance of their future husband by doing tricks with yarn, apple parings, or mirrors. I cut a lot of that stuff out, but if you went and researched what they used to do in the early days of early colonial America, especially once this stuff started coming in, all the ways that a woman could divine her future husband's crazy stuff, man. There was a move in America to mold Halloween into a holiday more about a community and neighborly get-togethers than about ghosts, pranks, and witchcraft. They recognized that we can't just keep these things being spooky and scary, witch and goblins and devils and demons and all these satanic images. We got to kind of make it a little bit more soft. We got to make it a little bit more palatable, make it more childlike. And otherwise, we're never going to get the masses to embrace this thing. So that was kind of the idea. We'll make this thing a little bit more about community gathering and get-togethers than about pranks and ghosts and witchcraft. At the turn of the 19th century, Halloween parties for both children and adults became the most common way to celebrate the day. Parties focused on games, foods of the season, and festive costumes were introduced. Parents were encouraged by newspapers and community leaders to take anything frightening or grotesque out of Halloween celebrations. And because of these efforts, Halloween lost most of its superstitious and religious overtones by the beginning of the 20th century. That's why most Christian parents today, and good Christian parents, I'm not saying they're bad, I'm not saying they're, beating their children and getting drunk and getting stoned and, burning black cats in the oven. I'm not doing that. But they don't realize that what they're engaging in is very much a satanic activity. And that's because it's been really modernized, okay? By the 1920s and 1930s, Halloween had become a secular but community-centered holiday with parades and town-wide Halloween parties as the featured entertainment. Despite the best efforts of many schools and communities, violent crimes and vandalism and debauchery began to be associated with Halloween. Vandalism and break-ins are said to be 60% of the crimes committed during Halloween. And crime-related insurance claims spiked by 24% on October 31st, according to a 2016 study by Travelers Insurance. So, what they try to do by making Halloween more palatable and make it more about community, of course, it can be that way for a time, but you know who's going to take that opportunity, especially as we begin to multiply the people on the planet in America. The criminals are going to become more involved in that same day as well, and predators are going to be more involved. The more you make it about community and home and decorations and children, the more the criminals look at spy those things as, okay, if you got a well-decorated home, that probably means you spent a lot of money decorating. And you're really invested in it. I mean, you got to have some stuff inside the house. And generally, if you're that much into Halloween, you're probably not home necessarily. They're out trick-or-treating themselves. So, and then they would recognize that if all the community is out doing this, right? Then there's other places as well that are not going to be home. And I guess there's things with lights, and now people got to worry about lights and whether you leave them on or off. I always forget how that thing's supposed to go to let people know you're home or not home. I forget how that thing works, but it's kind of an interesting thing when you look at statistically. Here's some statistics about crime around Halloween. Of the number of car accident fatalities on Halloween night, 40% are due to drinking and driving, according to the New Hampshire Travel something SA Association, Traffic and Safety Association. 40% are all drunk driving fatalities on Halloween night. Property crime is the most common crime committed on Halloween, with 60% of the property crimes involving theft. A Northeastern University professor claims that violent crimes increased by as much as 50% on Halloween, which is 2 times the daily average. The main reason is believed to be because Halloween is associated with pranking. During the baby boom of the 1950s, Halloween became commercialized by a 3-pronged attack. In 1946, there was only about 6,000 TVs in the home. 1946. Anybody here born that time? Nobody. I think maybe Brother Jim would be the only one. By 1951, any 1951ers? No 1951ers, okay. By 1951, there was 12 million TVs in the home.
Wow.
So from 46 to 51, we went from 6,000 to 12 million. Now, what happened in the span of that time? World War II ended, right? And now the nation, the country is turning from war back into the manufacturing. They want to get their mind off of war, and they want to get on jobs and income. And really, the 50s really became the Laodicean period, because shortly thereafter you have the new Bibles coming out and all that kind of stuff. 12 million by 1951, and by 1955, half the U.S. population had a TV in their home. The commercials around Halloween were directed mainly at the young. Now, secondly, community trick-or-treating was a relatively inexpensive way for an entire community to share the Halloween celebration. That was the second prong attack. So TV, let's call it community action, that kind of stuff, social. Then number 3, classrooms. Classroom parties and costume contests became a popular way for children to celebrate and show off costumes in a safe environment. So once the community is involved, once the classrooms are involved, now you've got the parents, you've got the students, you've got the kids all invested in, and of course TVs just pumping into the homes. Buy these costumes, buy this candy, Halloween, everybody's into it now. Thus, a new American tradition was born, and it has continued to grow. According to a CBS report in 2018 by Money Watch, Halloween is a night where 175 million Americans hit the streets to trick-or-treat. Spending on All Hallows Eve, originally a day, this is CBS saying this now, spending on All Hallows Eve, originally a day of remembrance for the dead associated with Samhain, spending at this time totaled $9 billion. $9 billion. Well, we're capitalists, right? So we love the idea of $9 billion being pumped into our economy. So spending at this time, in 2018, was $9 billion, making it the country's second largest commercial holiday after Christmas. Halloween movies, having a long history of being box office hits, such as classic films like Hell-O-Ween, a franchise based on the 1978 film starring Jamie Lee Curtis. In the movie, a young boy named Michael Myers murders his 17-year-old sister and is committed to jail only to escape as a teen on Halloween night and seek out his old home and a new target. A direct sequel to the original Halloween was released in 2018, starring Jamie Lee Curtis and Nick Castle. A sequel to that, Halloween Kills, was the 13th film in the Halloween franchise overall and was released this year, entitled Halloween Ends. So apparently the 13th Halloween series was the one to end on. I wonder how they picked 13 to end with. Let's see here. Considered a classic horror film, down to a spooky soundtrack, Halloween inspired other iconic slasher films like Scream, Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, and more family-friendly Halloween movies included Hocus Pocus, The Nightmare Before Christmas, Beetlejuice, and It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown. One day soon, though, the fun American holiday tradition of costume parties and decorations of spooky things will become a literal hell on earth, as we'll see here in just a second. So remember, we started with, they make a covenant with death and hell.
Yep.
So because America has made a covenant with death and hell, you know what God's going to give America and the whole world? He's going to give her death and hell. Look at Revelation chapter 6. That's all the reading by way of what I have typed out. I've thought about putting all these lessons into a book format. I don't know if I will or not, but that's just kind of how the Lord gave it to me. A lot of resources, a lot of online stuff, researching, and so many books written about it. There's no secular source at all that debates that it starts with the Druids at the time of Samhain. There's not going to be one person out there that writes on Halloween that'll say it comes from anywhere else. They all trace it right back to that. I think what the Lord has done through this lesson is taught me something different than what the world teaches, not how it comes directly out of the Bible from its original origin, being how Israel went into the land, drove those people out, and then Israel also being scattered and dispersed brought their stuff with them. All right, so Revelation chapter number 6. Look at verse 8. So now we're going to talk about the tribulation for a second. Literal hell on earth. That's what Isaiah 28 verse 15 was all about. And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him. And power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth to kill with sword, and with hunger, and with death, and with the beasts of the earth. So in Isaiah 28:15, when it says that they make a covenant with death and hell in the middle of the tribulation, that's exactly what's going to happen. They made a covenant with the Antichrist. In the middle of the tribulation, death and hell, the fourth seal here is going to come up out of the bottomless pit, and he's going to bring death and hell with him. And as a result, he's going to kill the sword with hunger, with death, and with beasts. Look at verse 15. Same chapter, verse 15. And the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the rich men, and the chief captains, and the mighty men, and every bondman, and every free man hid themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and the rocks, Fall on us, and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand? So what you're going to have is, you're going to have, in the middle of the week, you're going to have the devil's wrath poured out on the earth. And of course, that's associated with God's wrath, of course, because you can't have the devil's wrath without God's wrath being mixed in. But at the end of this thing, what they're going to have is they're going to have the Lord Jesus Christ coming back and destroying them for having made this covenant with death and with hell. Look at chapter 9. So America wants to make a covenant with Halloween, with death and hell. The world wants to make this covenant with death and hell, and God says, all right. You think it's all about masks and costume parties and trick-or-treating and cakes and bonfires. Let me show you what it's really all about when hell is literally unleashed on earth. No one's going to want to walk around in masks at that time. They're going to want to be hiding. Hiding is what they're going to want to be doing.
The Walking Dead.
Yeah. Revelation 9, look at verse 1. And the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of a great furnace. And the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth. And unto them was given power, as the scorpions of the earth have power. And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, or neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God on their foreheads. And to them it was given that they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented 5 months. And their torment was the torment of a scorpion. When he striketh a man, in those days shall men seek death, and shall not find it. They're going to wish they could die. And shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them. The shapes of the locusts were likened unto horses prepared unto battle. And on their heads were as it were crowns like gold, and their faces were as the faces of men. Costumes. It's a literal costume party. Only it's the devil's version of a costume party. And it don't look like the world's version of a costume party. There's no winners in this costume party. And they had hair as the hair of women. And their teeth were as the teeth of lions. And they had breastplates as it were breastplates of iron. So you got Iron Man, you know, that kind of stuff. You got all these kids running around with shields on costume party nights and the Power Rangers and all that stuff. Well, these things are literally coming up out of the earth with breastplates of iron. The sound of their wings, that's the sound of chariots of many horses running to battle. So what do you have? You have Tinkerbell. You have fairies. You have these little angels running around, little angel wings running around in the streets. Well, there's literally going to be coming things out of the pit there that have wings, the sound of chariots. They had tails like unto scorpions, and their stings were in their tails, and their power was to hurt men 5 months. You know, kids dress up like animals. You know, all sorts of animals on Halloween. You know, dogs, cats, ladybugs, caterpillars, scorpions, snakes. And they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue hath his name Apollyon. One woe was past, behold, there come 2 woes more hereafter. The 6th angel sounded, I heard a voice from the 4 horns of the golden altar, which is before God. And sang the 6th angel, which had the trumpet, loose the 4 angels, which are bound in the great river Euphrates. So you have 5 months of torture. And then after that, you're going to have this thing that breaks out. The 4 angels were loosed and prepared for an hour and a day and a month and a year to slay the 3rd part of men. And the number of the armies, so you have a year and a half in total here, so this is going on. And the number of the army of the horsemen were 200,000. That's 100 million. That's a 200 million man army. And I heard the number of them, and thus I saw the horses in the vision, and them that sat on them having breastplates of fire and of jacinth and brimstone. The heads of the horses were as the heads of lions, and out of their mouths issued fire and smoke and brimstone. So you got dragons, is what you got. Kids dress up as dragons all the time. By these 3 was the 3rd part of men killed by the fire, by the smoke, by the brimstone that issued out of their mouths. Their powers in their mouth and in their tails. For their tails were like unto serpents, and had heads, and with them they do hurt. And the rest of the men which were not killed by these plagues, that repented not of the works of their hands, that they should not worship devils and idols of gold and silver and brass and stone and of wood, which neither can see, nor hear, nor walk, neither repented they of their murders, nor of their sorceries, nor of their fornications, nor of their thefts. Notice theft is associated with Halloween. Here you have thefts, and you have sorcery, you have fornication, all sorts of debauchery takes place around Halloween night. Well, that's because Halloween comes out of the pit of hell. And when the pit of hell is opened up, all those things that people were dressing up as and pretending as and carrying on as, and again, they think it's all fun. Even the occult world, they think it's all fun. They think it's their idea of Satan worship is a whole lot different than literal Satan worship.
Right.
They're worshiping what they cannot see. Like what we worship what we cannot see. They're worshiping a God that they cannot see, the God of this world. We're worshiping the one and true God who we cannot see. And we're both worshiping God, as we got the one true one, they got the false one. When our God shows up, we're going to be thrilled. When their God shows up, they're going to be scared half to death, or all the way to death. They're going to wish they could die, and they can't. Now, what you notice here, I got a note here that I wrote down. Look back at verse 7. These locusts were like unto horses, prepared unto battle. They have hair. See that verse 8? They have faces like men. These locusts have faces like men, don't they? You see that, verse 7? Faces like men. They have hair like women, right? And they're connected. They look at verse 10. They got tails like unto scorpions, right? And they're running like chariots, like horses. You know what that is? That's a witch. You ever look at a witch? That's an ugly woman. She looks like a man. That pointed old nose there. Looks like an ugly dude is what it looks like.
Transgender.
And like an old man, like an old, wretched, wrinkly man is what she looks like. A witch does, if you look at the way they portray her on TV. And what has she got? She's got long hair, don't she?
Yeah.
What is she riding? A broom. So part of that broom is hanging out the back, ain't it? Like a tail. Like a tail. And she's using it like a, don't children ride around like on a broom like a horse? You know, you ever see that?
Yeah.
That's what a witch is. She's riding a horse, flying through the air, like a chariot would, with using horses, with a tail coming out the back there. She's got that long hair. I think these things represent witches, or witches are a mockery of these locusts. Look at Psalm 55. And I might be stretching a little bit, but where do you think these witches come from? Where do you think all the idea of this stuff comes from? It comes from the Bible somewhere. If you don't want to find it there, I'm sure you can find it somewhere else in the Bible. The Bible says suffer not a witch to live, so witches are in the Bible. And I think that the earthly representation of that looks nothing like the real thing. Psalm 55 and verse number 3. Because of the voice of the enemy, because of the oppression of the wicked, for they cast iniquity upon me, and in wrath they hate me. My heart is sore pain within me, and terrors of death are fallen upon me. Fearfulness and trembling have come upon me, and horror hath overwhelmed me. And I said, oh, that I had wings like a dove, for then would I fly away and be at rest. Lo, then would I wander far off and remain in the wilderness. That's what they're going to be saying in the tribulation. They're going to be saying, trembling has come upon me. Horror hath overwhelmed me. Horror movies? Come on. Hollywood hasn't made a real horror movie.
Yeah.
A real horror movie is going to show up, and it ain't just a movie produced by Hollywood. Francis Ford Coppola or Steven Spielberg or whoever else the famous ones are, Breckenheimer and that crowd. They got nothing like the movie that God's going to produce.
Yeah.
And horror is going to take hold on these people. Look at Ezekiel chapter 7.
It'll be real.
Ezekiel chapter 7. Ezekiel chapter 7. Look at verse 18. Ezekiel 7:18. Actually, look at verse 16. Give you the context of where we just were. But they that escape of them shall escape, and shall be on the mountains like doves in the valleys. So that's kind of, I wish I had like a dove. I could be like a dove and fly away.
Yeah.
All of them mourning. You ever heard of a mourning dove?
Mm-hmm.
All of them mourning, every one for his iniquity. All hands shall be feeble, and all knees shall be weak as water. That's the way they were when Jericho was coming down, and they had no strength left in them. They shall also gird themselves with sackcloth, and horror, see that? Horror shall cover them, and shame shall be upon all faces, and baldness upon all their heads. They shall cast off their silver in the streets, and their gold shall be removed. Their silver and their gold shall not be able to deliver them in the day of the wrath of the Lord. They shall not satisfy their souls, neither fill their bowls of candy, neither fill their bowls, because it is the stumbling block of their iniquity. All you're saying there is, let it not be the adorning of the hair and the wearing of gold. Costume parties are going to be done away with in tribulation. They're going to be casting their gold and their silver in the streets, trying to get God to get off their back, and God can't be bought off. All right, one more, Job 24. Job 24. So again, I don't think that most people celebrating Halloween today are thinking about the origins of Halloween. I don't think that at all. I think a very minority of people in America, or across the world, look at Halloween as a time to, commit crimes or celebrate witches and goblins, ghouls in the way they used to. Nevertheless, when you partake in it, you are doing it by extension. You're doing it almost by accident. You're stumbling upon it, if you will. And I don't think any Christian or any pastor has any business putting Halloween into his church at all. All right, Job 24, verse 17. For the morning is to them even as the shadow of death. If one know them, they are in the terrors of the shadow of death. So in the tribulation, the morning is going to be even as a shadow of death. And everywhere they go, it's going to be a shadow of death, haunting them. And that's because they've embraced it for so long that God says, I'm not going to just give it to you one night out of the year, every day. And you saw there was a year and a half where they're tormented by those things that God lets them out of the pit. That's just the things that come up out of the pit for 5 months. Then those four angels unloose the things in the river Euphrates there. And that 200 million man army goes through a year, a month, a day, and an hour, tormenting them. So that ain't the battle of Armageddon. That takes place in the second 3.5 years before the tribulation is over. That 200 million man army is not the battle of Armageddon. That 200 million man army takes place a year and a half or 5 months into the second 3.5 years and goes a year and a half. Which means there's still another 2 years left before the second advent takes place. See? So you're talking about trouble, man. All right, I feel myself fainting fast.
I had a quick theory. You know how it says death and hell followed them, right? So this has been my theory for a while. It said they had faces like men's faces. I almost wonder if people in the lowest hell, because in Job it says dead things are formed beneath.
Yes, sir.
I almost wonder if, because they had faces like men, if these were some of the people in the lowest